Hi and welcome to part 2, the reassembly of the Seiko 7019A automatic movement. Here I'm oiling the capstone with the chaton installed for the balance pivots using a Bergeon automatic oiler 1A, and this is the one for the main plate being put in place and the Diafix shock spring being manipulated on. Apologies for obscuring that there. Here I'm oiling the centre jewel prior to fitting the second wheel or centre wheel. The next step is to fit the centre wheel bridge. After tightening down the bridge, I use my tweezers to just check that the wheel rotates freely and smoothly. Then add a little bit of lubrication to the jewel hole. Following this, I lubricate the jewel holes for the third and fourth wheels. And then the third and fourth wheels are fitted accordingly. And a small amount of lubrication is added to the seconds spindle of the fourth wheel, which passes through the second wheel. I then add the escape wheel, and check that all of the gear train is moving smoothly before we move on to preparing the train and barrel bridge. You'll notice pointing out there that the cap jewels for the train are already put in place, and these are oiled with the version 1A oiler as per the balance cap jewels. The next step is to prepare the first reduction wheel for the automatic winding mechanism. The sharp-eyed of you out there will notice that I actually fit the pole the wrong way around, which at this point has been corrected and fitted the correct way around before fitting the pivot through its jewel hole and clamping on the E-clip that holds it in place. This can be quite tricky and can ping if you are not careful when fitting this. It sometimes helps if the first reduction wheel is sat on a blob of Rodico to hold that in place. And you note there that as I explained how this can ping if you're not careful, it did just there. You can see now that the first reduction wheel is fitted in place and lubricated accordingly. Here I'm lubricating the barrel Arbor pivots. And placing the barrel and the click and click spring combined. Ensuring that it locates in its locating hole and that the end of the spring moves freely. We can then go ahead and fit the balance and train bridge. It's important when fitting this to ensure that all of the pivots are located with some careful manipulation and jiggling, and then rotating the barrel like so will show if the train moves smoothly along with the escape wheel as they should before fitting the screws. Before fully tightening down the plate, it's essential to just double check that everything is rotating smoothly. And once again, when you've fully tightened all the screws, double check that everything is rotating and moving smoothly as it should. Here I'm moving the pole over the post that holds it in place while refitting the ratchet wheel to make sure that the lever doesn't get caught, bent or damaged. And though it's probably impossible to tell from the view on the video, it appears that this ratchet wheel has an entirely round hole, but it does in fact have one flat face which has to mate up with the barrel arbor, which also has a flat face. Here I'm using a piece of pegwood to hold the ratchet wheel in place whilst I tighten the ratchet wheel screw, and then we're lifting the pole levers back over before fitting the second reduction wheel. It's worth noting the Seiko service manual recommends a small amount of lubrication on the teeth of the second reduction wheel, and this is something I'm a little unsure of personally, because my thought with ratchet wheels and with pinion leaves and gear teeth is that lubrication can attract and have dirt stick to it, which will then essentially turn into a grinding paste. And because this is in motion all of the time that the watch is being worn, I actually have a preference for this being dry, although the official manual does state a small amount of lubrication should be used. So this one is entirely up to you. I personally don't lubricate these. It's not something I feel is a particularly good idea, but I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who do and don't have any problems. Remember that the screw for the second reduction wheel is a left-handed screw, and to tighten this it must be turned anti-clockwise as if you were loosening an ordinary screw. Just before tightening that down fully, I just move the pole levers out and make sure that the second reduction wheel is fully seated. And then test that by rotating the first reduction wheel to ensure that the pole levers are actually moving the second reduction wheel as they should. And as you can see, they are there. Next step is to fit the pallet fork and pallet fork bridge. I've already fitted the pallet fork in there, and for some reason the footage of me placing the pallet fork, which I thought I'd filmed, was nowhere to be found, so I either didn't press the record button when I thought I had, or I've accidentally deleted that, so apologies for that. But the pallet fork is placed in position, and then the pallet fork bridge is manipulated onto the top of that. This is easier done up close with a loop and is a little trickier, as you can see, when you're working with a camera focused on the work and you're trying to keep that in the frame. As with any other bridge, I like to fit these down and just tack them down and check that everything moves freely before I fully tighten them. And you can see there I'm just manipulating the pallet fork back and forth to see that it freely moves. Apologies for the numerous sections of this video where my fingers obscure the work that's going on, but it was quite tricky to find a suitable camera angle, and as my camera doesn't have a flip out screen and I don't have the means to place it on the front of my desk, this wasn't a possibility. So while I did try to keep focused on the work and keep my hands out of the way, unfortunately there were a few moments throughout the video where I do obscure things a little, so my apologies for that. I'm just adding a little bit of a wind onto the main spring barrel here and checking that the pallet fork drops when manipulated across and that the escape wheel turns as it should. The next step is to add a very, very tiny amount of oil to the face of the pallet, the pallet fork end stone, the exit pallet fork end stone, that is. Again, unfortunately, that was obscured by my finger there. And that's something that's incredibly tricky to film anyway. It's ideally the kind of thing that would need to be filmed under a microscope, which is something I don't have. I would normally do that using a high power magnification loupe to get in very, very close to see what I'm doing. In that case I didn't, because of the camera being there, but to give you an idea of what's what. And then the pallet fork is manipulated back and forth several times to make sure that the lubrication is spread evenly across the escape wheel teeth. Here I'm manipulating the balance into position and just giving it a little shake. It's this one needed a little bit of manipulation to get it into place, and a little bit of a nudge to get it beating, which it is doing right there. I then screw down the securing screw for the balance cock and double check before I clamp that down tightly that the balance is still spinning freely and that the pivots are not misaligned or cinched up too tightly. Here I'm using a pair of brass tweezers just to hold down the pallet cock at the end where it locates over the stud before tightening that. Now turn over the movement to work on the dial side and the keyless works. And before I fit anything, I'm lubricating the train wheel jewels that are covered by the one-piece end stone cover. Using a little Rodico just to clean up. Before placing the cap jewel cover in place and screwing that down. Here I'm adding the clutch wheel and the winding stem, or hand setting stem, as this particular one doesn't actually wind. I'm now lubricating the pivot points for the various parts of the keyless works. Here I'm fitting the setting lever spring, and a small amount of grease is added to the parts that bear onto the main plate. Next up is the setting lever with the pivot post and the contact points lubricated as per the setting lever spring. And finally the cover plate, which secures this assembly in place. Once this is tightened down, I operate the mechanism back and forth a few times just to ensure that lubrication is spread evenly. And then a little bit more watch grease is added to the slot in the clutch wheel. And a quick wipe over with some Rodico ensures that the excess is cleared away. Here I'm adding the quick-set day wheel spring. Similar in design to the setting lever spring, this operates the push function for advancing the day for a rapid advance. Ideally, what I should have done is fitted the curved portion that I'm manipulating into place there in place prior to fitting the other side and securing it. And there I'm just testing the operation by pushing the stem. Next I fit the date wheel jumper spring after lubricating the pivot point and the contact face of the spring and manipulating this into place with a pair of tweezers. Which unfortunately is just out of shot. And there I'm just manipulating the spring to demonstrate its operation. I'm now adding a little lubrication to the centre wheel pinion before fitting the cannon pinion, which slides on and snaps into place. Following this is the date wheel advance ring, the intermediate plastic date wheel, the minute wheel, and the hour wheel. I'm just checking the operation of those in the date and hand setting positions, and then we add the return spring and the rapid day advance mechanism. This needs to be manipulated into place and then tightened down before checking it's fully located and fully tightened down to the plate, at which point I check the operation by pressing the winding stem forward. Next up is the date ring, which is sat into place, and then the date wheel jumper spring is manipulated to allow that to fall between two of the teeth. And then the cover plate is fitted over this and secured in place with 2 screws. The other 2 screws form part of the day wheel jumper spring and are fitted afterwards. Next I'm fitting the 2-part mechanism which advances the date on a 24-hourly basis. And then the day wheel jumper spring, as mentioned previously, which is fitted on top of the cover plate and secured by 2 screws, making a total of 4 screws which hold the cover plate in place. The last item prior to the dial is the day wheel, and this is to be fitted, and the day wheel jumper spring is to be manipulated with a pair of tweezers onto the star mechanism which operates the day wheel. And then once the circlip is in place, the functionality of the day and date wheels can be checked for rapid advance setting and then pulled out to the hand setting position and turned clockwise to check that both the date and the day advance accordingly. Next step is to replace the spacer ring and the dial, which slot into place and tighten via the eccentric screws on the back that you saw in the disassembly. And once again I just check the day and date to make sure everything lines up before going ahead and fitting the hands. Fitting the hands can be quite a fiddly procedure, and I will normally use a combination of placing with tweezers and pressing down with a homemade hand setting tool, which is essentially a plastic tube with a hole in. And the problem with that for video is it's hard to get a good camera angle to show that with the setup as I have it currently. To set the hands, obviously I should have mentioned as well that I rotate that until the date changes, which signifies 12 PM, and then both the minute and the hour hand are set pointing straight up at the 12 o'clock position. This ensures that the date will change on or around midnight. Quite probably the fiddliest of all of them is the seconds hand. And especially when you're trying to keep it in the frame of the camera. As you can see, I'm not succeeding very well here, as I'm drawing it towards me to look at out of habit, and not realizing I'm pulling it out of the frame. And then I give that a final test to make sure that the date changes, and the date changes accordingly. Give the dial a quick blow with an air blower and the inside of the case as well, before relocating everything back into the case and relocating the stem. The next step is the rear spacer ring. And at this point we realign the first reduction wheel and the oscillating weight to its optimum position. I am going to do a separate little video on this setting position and optimum position, because your typical Swiss automatic winding movements don't have an alignment necessity, unlike the Seiko mechanisms. And there is a reason for this, because the Seiko mechanism is a simpler yet very effective method, but it does need to be aligned for optimum efficiency. And you'll see the little hole in the first reduction wheel that needs to align with the locating peg in the balance cock bridge, and then the oscillating weight needs to face downwards towards the crown, towards the 3 o'clock position. And as I say, I will make another short little video explaining the reasoning behind this and demonstrating why. And finally, the back of the watch is sealed. Hopefully with future watch strips and rebuilds I will find a better workflow, but that said, I hope you found this useful. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.